Hi, everyone. So now we are in Chapter 3, Part 3, Psychosocial Development of Infancy and Toddlerhood. So in this class, when we talk about psychosocial development, we are going to use Erikson's model of psychosocial development. So we are now in stage 1. So stage 1, in Erikson's paradigm, he talked about crises that people have to overcome. And that unless you overcome the crises, then you might be a little challenged to move on to the next stage. So trust versus mistrust would really be infancy to about 1 year old. And then stage 2, autonomy versus shame, would be about 2 to 3 years old. The idea is in stage 1, primary caregivers have to establish to the children, to the infants, that the world is a trustworthy place, that children can trust their primary caregivers to meet their needs. If primary caregivers do not meet their needs, then your child will be fairly insecure for a long time, right? Now, if they successfully establish trust versus mistrust, then the next stage is that the children will want to establish autonomy. So think about a 2-year-old who wants to do everything themselves, right? So they only do that if they feel comfortable in their environment. So the most important goal of infancy is to develop that basic sense of trust, right? Then the most important goal of toddlerhood, on the other hand, is developing a sense of independence. A child will only seek independence in an environment in which they feel safe. So that's the idea there. So in terms of infants, we first talk about temperament. So temperament, we believe, is biologically based. It is really a summary of how we see babies interacting with their environment. Temperament tends to be fairly consistent across situations. We see it as being stable, and it is genetically determined. What does that mean? Well, when we talk about temperament, we look at 3 dimensions, right? We're looking at, we categorize them in 3 ways. There are easy babies, and these babies tend to be playful. They're regular, they're easily predictable. They're patterns of sleeping and waking and eating, and that's what we mean by biologically based. They're very consistent. They adapt well to new environments. Slow to warm babies they're more fearful, right? So they are not as consistent as easy babies. They might even start off difficult, but then as they get more comfortable with the environment and the people around them, they start to open up and be more like easy babies. The most challenging babies are known as difficult or feisty babies. These babies are very irritable. They do not adapt to change easily. They are irregular. And they're crying a lot. So if you want to think of it on a spectrum, easy is on one end and difficult is on the other, and slow to warm is right there in the middle. Talk more about easy and everything after. So let's talk about emotions, right? So because part of our categorization is that idea of easy babies are happy, difficult babies are usually irritable and crying a lot. When we think about emotions, it is really a physiological response to the environment. So it includes that component. Is their heart racing? Are their eyes dilating? Are they afraid, right? So there's that part. And then there's the cognitive appraisal part. So even though babies are really, really young, there is a part of their brain that's triggering, oh, my heart is racing, I'm afraid. So the cognitive appraisal is taking that physiological response and interpreting it as what they are feeling. That's the cognitive appraisal. And then the third part is really the labeling of the emotion. When a child feels afraid or unhappy, it motivates action, not only from the child, it also motivates action from the caregiver. The importance of emotion is that it expresses to people around them what is going on internally with the child. So it's really important for primary caregivers to try to interpret the emotional expression of babies, especially when they can't talk, right? So a lot of the nonverbals are especially critical when children can't talk, so people have to interpret it. Social smiles, right? That's the first sign of happiness. that doesn't emerge until 2 months. So any smile that people see before about 2 months is really more of a physiological response to gas or something like that. It's not something intentional. Laughing starts about 3 to 5 months. And then it's not until about 2 years that children actually try to make other people explicitly laugh with them. So it's a really nice progression in terms of the positive emotions. Negative emotions, believe it or not, emerge earlier than positive emotions. But if you think about survival, it makes sense, right? It makes sense for children to be able to express negative things before positive things, because usually negative things are an alert to the caregivers that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. So the very first negative emotion is generalized distress. We all know it, babies cry, right? That is the very first emotion they emit. Why? Because they're conveying to us that something is wrong. They're hungry. They need to be changed. Maybe they just need social interaction. But any way you look at it, it is a motivating component for the caregiver to address a situation. So differentiated negative emotions, we're talking about sulking, pouting, taking a tantrum. That's usually about 8 months, right? Anger, sadness, fear are the primary negative emotions that people usually read in terms of babies. Any questions about positive and negative? Okay, so in terms of types of emotions, there are two types. There are basic emotions, which is like being happy, being mad, being scared, sad, and grossed out, disgust. That happens in early infancy. So that's usually an infant responding to some sort of stimuli. Then we have self-conscious emotions. So self-conscious emotions don't occur until the babies understand that they are separate from their environment. Prior to that understanding, babies actually think that whatever they feel, everybody else feels too, right? So that's basic emotions. Self-conscious emotions are things like envy, wanting something that other people have, being proud, feeling like what they're doing is really good and wanting to share that with others. Shame, guilt, doubt, embarrassment, all of these are what we call self-conscious emotions. It's good in the sense that only when children understand that they are different from the environment, that their minds and thinking, emotions, everything like that are individual to them, that doesn't happen, right? These self-conscious emotions are not experienced until that point. Prior to that point, so under 1 year old, it's all just basic emotions that we're looking at. So self-conscious emotions require self-awareness and social understanding. So there's no point to trying to shame a 1 year old or a 10-month-old, like, oh, you bad boy, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not going to work, right? Doesn't happen because they're not really self-aware yet. And really, you should never call a child bad boy, bad girl, or anything like that, because what you're doing is you're labeling them as a person. Always focus on the action, not on the individual. Actions can be changed. Any questions about the types of emotions? So there's basic and self-conscious. Okay, so a really wonderful test is called the Rogue test. And that is how you can determine if students if babies can know that they are separate from whatever's in the mirror. So the Rouge test is that you put a little piece of lipstick or something on the baby's cheek, and then you see if they reach for the baby in the mirror, then they think that's a different baby. If they reach for their own cheek, then they know that it is their own face and they are self-aware. So that's how you can tell. Usually it's about 18 months old that they come up with this. So as I mentioned, the self-conscious emotions, those are things that relate to their sense of self. Usually they show embarrassment at about 1.5 to 2 years old. And pride is increasingly tied to performance about 3 years old, and we'll talk about this in early childhood. So guilt, That actually emanates from an empathy for others. So it's actually a good thing in the sense of that they're being conscious of other people's feelings and not wanting to hurt other people. So shame is really more about themselves. So guilt is empathy for others. Shame is something that they're feeling within themselves. And then social referencing is when babies are looking at other people, usually a primary caregiver, to understand how they should react to another environment. That's what we mean by social referencing. So if there's a stranger, the baby might look at their primary caregiver, and if the primary caregiver is smiling and nodding, then they'll know that this stranger is safe. And that's the idea there. And that's about 8 to 12 months. So prior to about 6 months old, babies just want to be held. They don't care who it is. After that, they start to care. So attachment, let's talk about attachment for a little bit. And this is with the strange situation. So separation anxiety is when babies are really terrified and scared when they are separated from their primary caregiver. And so prior to about 8 months, usually around 6 months old, as I mentioned, they don't really care who is caring for them or holding them as long as they're being held. But at about 8 to 13 months old, suddenly they're very, very attached to their primary caregiver. And it doesn't usually decrease until about 2 years old. And we see this consistently across all cultures. So first 6 months, anybody will do as long as their needs are met. 7 to 24 months, only certain people that they want, and that's because of the attachment component. So let me see. There are different theories of attachment. So I do want you to look at this study of Harlow's study of the monkeys. So Freud believed that babies were attached to their mothers because moms gave them food, right? That's sort of the idea, is that, okay, their moms are meeting an instinct for survival, which is food. On the other hand, Bowlby believed that babies were attached to their moms or primary caregivers because of the comfort they provide. It's a safe base. And so Harlow came up with this study for infant monkeys, wanting to test this theory. So this is really sad. They took a monkey away from its mom and gave it two moms. One is a wire monkey mom and the other one is a cloth monkey mom. And what they tested to see is which mom, quote unquote mom, did the baby monkey spend the more time with. So the wire monkey, all it did was give milk. There's a bottle in it, it could get sustenance. The cloth monkey had no milk, but it was soft and comfy. And what they found is that the monkey actually spent more time with the soft towel mom and only went to the wire mom for nurture, right? So it would get, milk for a little bit, maybe half an hour, and then spend the rest of its time with the other mother. So the idea there is that Bowlby's theory of attachment was more supported than Freud's. So this is kind of that summary of the drive reduction theory of Freud and the ethological explanation of Bowlby. Okay, so now let's talk about the strange situation. There is a YouTube video and you should understand this. Okay, so the three main elements of the strange situation. So Ainsworth was a graduate student of Bowlby, and she developed this experiment to try to categorize people's attachments. So the three main elements are that the child is brought into an unfamiliar environment, and then it is the stranger is present and the mom leaves and then the mom returns. So those are the kind of elements we're looking at. And we're looking at how does the baby react to it? Okay, so we're looking at how the baby reacts to the environment when they're first brought to this strange place. How does the baby react when the mom leaves and there's so how does the baby react when a stranger comes in and then the mom leaves the baby with a stranger? Of course, this is all very safe. Mom's never too far away. And then how does baby react when the mom comes back? That's what we're looking at. So we were able to categorize attachments into these different components. A securely attached child, when coming to a new environment, still feels comfortable because mom is there, right? So the baby will come and adapt easily to the new environment. The baby can play comfortably as long as the mom is present. Even when a stranger comes in, the baby might look at the stranger and then continue to play. When mom gets up and leaves, baby starts crying, right? Because that's their secure base. But when mom comes back, the baby calms down and everything is fine. So that is secure attachment. About 60% of babies have a secure attachment to their primary caregiver. Now we have a variation, ambivalent attachment. So the rest of these are insecure attachments. With an ambivalent attachment, the baby wants to stick to the mom. Baby does not explore in a new environment. They just want to stay with the mom. So in an ambivalent attachment, even when mom is nearby, the baby is never comfortable. They're always kind of fearful. And then when the stranger comes in, even mom's there, they don't want to approach the stranger. So see the difference between a secure attachment and ambivalent. Secure attachment, as long as mom is there, baby feels comfortable enough to play and even will notice the stranger, but doesn't get disturbed by it. Ambivalent attachment is that the baby is always kind of fearful. And it's called ambivalent because when mom leaves, the baby doesn't really calm down and the baby's still like unsure. So this is why it's considered an insecure attachment. So baby is never really happy or feel safe enough to explore, worry about the stranger, will cry when mom leaves and continue crying even when mom comes back. So that's the idea, and doesn't even like seem to be comforted by the mom's presence. That's why it's considered ambivalent. Insecure avoidant. So ambivalent, it's about 15 to 20% of babies have that ambivalent attachment. Insecure avoidant attachment, on the other hand, is they're not like they're indifferent to their mom, right? So they don't care where mom's sitting. They're just gonna go on and play. When the stranger comes, they're not even really fearful of the stranger. So that's why it's called like insecure avoidant, is even strangers will comfort the baby. And the baby isn't even staying close to the mom. So the baby might avoid the caregiver. And when the caregiver leaves, they don't cry. And when they come back, the baby ignores them. It's a really interesting interaction. So for insecure avoidant babies, that's why it's called avoidant. It's like they're somehow emotionally distant from their caregiver. Little emotion where caregiver departs or returns. And that's about 10 to 15%. We believe that it shows an inconsistent secure base at home, and that the babies are not confident that their caregiver is going to be responsive to their needs. Insecure disorganized. So this one is really sad because this is where we think the baby might be abused at home. So it's disorganized because the baby doesn't seem to know how to react to a new situation, does not have a current method of dealing with distress. And so the baby might cry during separation, but avoid the caregiver upon return. It's just, the baby doesn't know what to do. That's why it's called insecure disorganized. So less than 5% of babies, thank goodness, show this kind of attachment. And about 5 years, about 1 year olds, about 50 to 75% of those who show an insecure disorganized attachment may be in homes that are high risk for the baby. So just to summarize, secure is when the caregiver meets the child's needs and is responsive in an appropriate way. Insecure ambivalent, the caregiver is responding inconsistently to the child's needs. Insecure avoidant, probably the caregiver is not responding to the child's need, which is why the child reacts that way. And then insecure disorganized is that the caregiver behaves erratically or possibly abuses the child. Something to keep in mind is that, remember, these early studies were really focused on middle class to upper middle class white homes. And so what we do know is that there are different cultural contexts that might be occurring, right? So how some babies react, maybe it's, the way that culturally that parents are interacting with the child. So we have to always keep that in mind. What we know is the family context reveals certain emotions that the children are exposed to. So especially if the parent, the primary caregiver, for example, is depressed, that's going to affect the way that the child interacts in other environments. So that's important to know. And how the family or the primary caregivers express emotion, that is going to be reflected in the way the child expresses emotion as well. So it's important to understand these different contexts. So what are the implications? What do we know? Well, when infants have secure attachments, this is what they show. They're more curious, they play more effectively, and they have better relationships with teachers when they're finally in school. That's what that secure attachment gives them. And at 15 years old, so think about this, this is long-standing, these are longitudinal studies that we're looking at. These babies who showed secure attachments had more friends, they tend to be more social and more confident and more open with feelings. So a lot of really good implications to those who have secure attachments. In terms of poor attachment, the babies might not be thriving. So they might not grow well. They may be undernourished. And that's because, you know, their caregivers aren't meeting their needs, or maybe they're also showing depression and being unable to thrive. There's something called reactive attachment disorder, where babies actually have difficulty forming relationships with others as a result of having pure insecure attachments with their primary caregivers. So attachment is a really important component. So summary, it is, sorry, I apologize. Emotional expressions are really important at this stage. We know that emotions are universal. And attachment, on the other hand, remember, that is sort of that idea of how well the child is connecting with their primary caregivers. We do know that there's support for the ethological explanation for attachment, right? Freud's drive reduction theory was not supported. We know that there is variation in the attachment styles. So with Erikson's psychosocial stages, we have the first two stages, trust versus mistrust. All right, is this world a safe place? Can I get all my needs met? And stage 2 is autonomy versus shame. Once we understand the world is a safe place, let's become independent and let's explore it. So here you start to see the emerging sense of self, and it really is an interesting and part. So you go from babies who aren't really moving much to all of a sudden these little people who are starting to show their personality. And so how the primary caregiver interacts with them is very, very critical in these first two stages. And I'm going to stop this recording.